So it sounds pretty silly, but I like to think of my method of constructing tanks as the inside-out plywood aquarium. I know, it sounds a little bit silly, but hear me out. So if you look up plywood aquarium construction on YouTube, you'll tend to find something in common with almost all of the tanks that you see. They're big, they're cumbersome, and they're a bit ugly. So I knew when I wanted to start building plywood aquariums that I wanted to create an aquarium that gave the same sleek and elegant appearance of an all-glass aquarium. So traditional plywood aquariums rely on constructing a timber box out of plywood and framing timber, or sometimes stacked timber sleepers, and a viewing window is cut out, a little bit smaller than the size of the glass pane to be used. And then a thick bead of silicone is applied all the way around the inside of that window cutout. The glass pane is dropped inside and pushed up against that silicone. So the silicone acts as kind of a gasket as such, and the actual seal is created by the sheer force and weight of the water itself pushing the glass pane against that silicone. And of course that works very well, except for, well, one little thing, and that is, well, it's ugly. But the inside-out plywood aquarium construction is actually different. I like to think of it as that the glass itself is on the same plane as any timber walls or sides that are also in the aquarium, not just dropped inside, as is the case with normal plywood aquarium construction. Just think of it analogous to a traditional glass aquarium construction, except we substituted some of the walls for timber, and of course we substituted the base of the tank also for timber. So credit where credit is due. 4 plywood aquariums ago, I watched a YouTube video on constructing an all-glass aquarium with a plywood base. And it was very, very inspirational and very educational for me. I'll put the link to that video in the description for this video, so you can watch it. So my initial 7 by 4 foot mixed coral reef tank was constructed using this technique. I used a lamination of 2 sheets of plywood as the base of that tank with 4 glass sides. Now what I actually did was to create a lip, and that lip is pivotal to actually locking the glass sides in place. By setting back the top sheet of plywood by the thickness of the glass plus about 3 mil for silicone, you actually create a lip upon which the glass can sit. After actually screwing an edge board in place, a valley is created. Can you see that valley? That valley is filled with silicone upon which the glass is dropped in place, effectively locking its base together. And the corners of the aquarium can be silicone together as per a normal all-glass aquarium construction. Of course, well, I had to go bigger. I had to go bigger, didn't I? So I decided to build my 12 foot by 4 foot by 3 foot high outdoor Aussie turtle plywood aquarium. And it happens to be the exact same size as Palau Reef. In doing so, I actually come up with a slightly different construction technique. Underneath the actual floor of Palau Reef and my Aussie turtle tank is a timber subfloor with joists, just like you'd build, well, a subfloor for a house or a deck. And on that subflooring, I've actually screwed and glued plywood, just like that. But what I actually did was I actually set the plywood sheet back from the leading edge of the joist by the thickness of the glass plus about 3 mil for the silicone. And of course that epoxy was all done, the whole thing was sealed up, and of course an edge board was fixed in place. So once again, we've ended up with a valley upon which it can be filled with silicone and the glass again dropped in place. Using a timber rear wall such as the one that I've got back here in Palau Reef, has actually a number of advantages over just using a glass aquarium. So in Australia, glass is actually really, really expensive. And I mean really expensive. So not only do you save money in actually the construction method if you are actually saving money on using glass, but using a epoxy plywood rear wall or end walls actually allows you to bring out your artistic side, as you can see by my artistically painted backdrop for Palau Reef. But not only that, Both epoxy and super glue love to stick to epoxied plywood, and that allows you to fix hardscape items such as driftwood or root tangles or stones to the rear wall or end wall of the aquarium and create that kind of dramatic riverbank style which you might use in a freshwater aquarium. Or in the case of my Palau reef here, it allows me to actually adhere my coral reef structure to the actual aquarium itself. As we know, silicone loves glass, but it unfortunately just does not love timber or rocks. Check out how you can also throw decorative sands into the still wet epoxy to give your aquarium a truly natural feel. And not only that, having a rear wall of an aquarium made of timber allows you to very easily drill holes for your overflow bulkheads, particularly where that is impossible to do once you've chosen to use tempered glass in the aquarium construction, much like I do. But there's always a but, isn't there? So by using both glass and epoxied plywood as walls of our inside out aquarium, somewhere in its construction both that glass and that timber must meet, such as over in that corner over there. And to have that happen structurally and successfully, it brings me to the topic of bracing. So we've locked the actual glass walls down into that silicone-filled valley, and of course we've screwed down the bottom plate of our timber rear wall. But the contents of this aquarium, the water, is trying its utmost to force these walls out and spill its contents all over your lovely hardwood floors. Now, I don't know about your wife, but my wife would not like the idea of having 4,000 litres of seawater lapping gently at her slippers. So check out this photo of Takashi Amano's personal aquarium over in Japan. He's actually used a stainless steel one-piece frame in the construction of his own personal aquarium. It's actually reminiscent of the old metal framed aquariums from a long, long time ago. Now, that metal frame, that external metal frame, can be done actually in one piece, just like Takashi Amano, or it can be done as individual pieces that are siliconed in place, much like my turtle tank outside, and then bolted at the corners and bolted where the top cross pieces meet the front of the actual frame. With this Palau Reef aquarium, I've chosen to do a one-piece rim or top brace that I've actually dropped down onto the aquarium. By doing so, what that's actually done is effectively lock the glass sides and the rear plywood side in place. Obviously the weight of the water and the force of the water inside the aquarium is trying to push these walls outwards. But by actually locking them within this metal frame, it actually prevents any one wall from bowing outwards in relation to the others. This aluminium frame is made up out of 50mm by 50mm angle, or 2" by 2", and it's 6mm or 1/4 inch thick. In a freshwater style aquarium, aluminium is quite safe to use. But corrosion is a big concern with a marine aquarium, and I have dealt with the white powdery aluminium oxide on my old reef tank. So I decided to go with aluminium. Give it a good polish up, which I must admit was a painfully long procedure, and a thorough clean and seal. So I did try a clear polyurethane sealer, which much to my dismay wasn't successful at sticking fully to the polished aluminium, and so I spent a good long time peeling that old polyurethane off. And now it's back to the good old epoxy coating once again. But of course, if you're building a freshwater aquarium, disregard all that. It's quite safe to use aluminium. Freshwater will not corrode aluminium. It will dull off a little bit, but you could also get out the old wool polishing disc on an angle grinder and give it a polish up after all. And so coating it with some form of sealer will not be necessary. And of course the same can be said if you choose to use stainless steel. Now you could also consider powder coating your aluminium. In my case I wanted to have it clear coated, and I did speak to a number of powder coaters, but I must admit none of them actually gave me any confidence that powder coating would be sufficiently able to withstand the proximity to the sloshing salt water that will be occurring with my Carlson Surge devices gushing hundreds of litres of water into Palau Reef. So stainless steel was one option. And 316 stainless steel, of course, is the what's considered marine grade stainless steel. And obviously getting as high a polish as possible would give it the most degree of resistance and weathering. However, if you've ever looked at highly polished stainless steel, particularly around the coast, you'll notice that it does tend to tea stain. And I was worried that if I did use stainless steel bracing, that I would get the tea staining effect, which would potentially contaminate my saltwater coral reef tank with oxides like chromium and other nasty heavy metals. The other thing about stainless steel, of course, is that it's ridiculously expensive and it's a lot harder to actually grind and polish up. But of course, the inside-outside aquarium relies upon the marrying of those glass walls with those timber walls. So what about where they meet? How are we going to get that structurally bonded together? Now, silicon itself is a fantastic material for actually bonding glass to glass, such in the case of these corners here. And you can actually use them like any other modern reef tank where it's just a simple, neat silicon edge, or in the case of this tank where I've used tempered glass, I want to protect those edges, and I've used some aluminium angle capping. But where the glass itself actually comes back to meet the timber, I've had to do something a little bit different. I don't trust silicon itself to sufficiently adhere the glass to the actual epoxy coated plywood, such as at this junction here. Now you can see this tank here is a little bit different to some others that I've built. It's actually a first, where I've actually constructed this nib wall and also down the other side there as a way of actually providing some structural bracing to keep the back wall square to the base. The nib wall itself is actually an internal structural component, and the glass continues past to the actual back corner where it meets the actual plywood rear wall. The silicon bead that you can see down here is to seal the water in. The silicon mesh that you can see all over here was to hold that glass in place while I actually fiddled around getting the bracing in place. It's this rear piece of aluminium angle, which is silicon to the glass here, wraps around the corner and is screwed into the rear timber work of that rear wall that provides the structural strength. That sounds funny, doesn't it? The structural strength. It provides the structural component to the actual marrying of the glass to the timber. And the silicon that's inside this actual angle, you can see just there, is just another step in providing some backup waterproofing or water sealing if for some reason this amount of silicon here fails. Now I've left this section of the aquarium bare at the moment. It's not going to stay this way. But the next step in this aquarium after I've finished coating the actual aluminium with the epoxy is to actually do a water test. I haven't actually gone any further with the actual island construction itself because I want to make sure this aquarium doesn't leak. And if it's going to leak, it's going to leak inside to the actual island, or water's going to track past this glass and to the outside there. So I want to be able to see if that's happening. Once I'm okay with my freshwater test, I'll cut up some plywood paneling, give it a good coat of epoxy and polyurethane, and silicon that in place to finish it off. Now, I've had a couple of questions regarding what silicon I use when I'm constructing my inside-out plywood aquariums. For the structural joins, such as the glass down into the valley at the bottom or glass on glass in the corner, I like to use the Bostik V2 acetic cure glazing silicon. Now, I must admit, I'm not actually sponsored by any of these products. I do find this Bostik V2 to be particularly good silicon. For the non-structural or less critical joints, such as the ones where I'm just cushioning between the aluminium and the glass, or the aluminium and the plywood shell of the aquarium, I tend to just pick up one of these cheaper acetic cure glazing silicons from my local hardware store. So the glass itself that I've chosen to use in my inside-out plywood aquariums is actually 12mm or 1/2 inch tempered and heat-soaked balustrating glass. So by choosing balustrating glass, I've found a way to actually purchase relatively thick and large panes of glass fairly economically in Australia. But I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. toughened or tempered glass versus float or anneal glass in aquarium construction. It's the age-old debate. So if you'd like to learn more about my rationale for using tempered glass in plywood aquarium construction, then I've got a video that's just right for you. And if you'd like to learn more about the heat soaking process of balustrading glass as an added safety measure, then this is the video that you should watch next. But not only that, I can tell that you're wondering how in the world I've managed to marry these two panes of glass together into one viewing window. Now I've got an old video, it's a long one, but it's a goodie. And if it explains all about my plywood aquarium construction, and towards the end of that video, it's going to explain to you how I managed to pull off using two panes of glass. This is that video down there. You should definitely check that one out. But of course, after watching this one. I'll see you next time. Over and out.